I think I perform well with my back against the wall. So, hey, Peter, you have to build a business and start getting income, money flowing in a month because you don't have any other freaking choice. That is the best outcome for me, right? I think for some people it's kind of stressful, and right, maybe just stall. But for me,
the amount of work you can do and the ideas you say yes to becomes unbounded, and that's where some of the best ideas come from.
Welcome to Triangle Tweener Talks, a weekly podcast by builders for builders where we explore the startup journey from the idea to the exit and all the lessons in between, with an exclusive focus on founders from the Triangle region of North Carolina. Tweener Talks is produced by Earfluence. Now here's your host, serial founder and general partner of the Triangle Tweener Fund, Scott Wingo.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Triangle Tweener Talks, featuring Peter Zaitsev. I first stumbled onto Percona in 2015 when I did the first tweener list. I did a double take. Here was a company I'd never heard of that was relatively large here in the Triangle. I found the founder, Peter, and realized that he was a rock star in the open source community. And this whole company was right here in our backyard in the Triangle. At the time, Percona was maybe 5 million in revenues, and now it's much larger, as you'll hear. When Peter and I meet, we usually talk about tactical issues that are happening in a particular moment in business. So it was great to sit down with Peter for this episode and hear the story from the beginning. The story starts in a very unusual place for a Triangle Tweener. It starts in Russia, and then it threads through the United Kingdom to Seattle, back to the United Kingdom, and then back to Durham. This episode is sponsored by Bank of America. Bank of America's transformative technology group helps game-changing tech businesses and founders realize their boldest ambitions across a wide range of technology sectors. With hands-on support, world-class resources, and an extensive network, B of A provides the stability and scalability that tech companies need to rapidly grow today and into the future. Smashing Boxes, a local Durham-based lean design-centric digital transformation company. Robinson Bradshaw, a full-service business law firm with a passion for supporting the Triangle entrepreneurial ecosystem. Learn more about Robinson Bradshaw's startup and venture capital practice at robinsonbradshaw.com. EisnerAmper, formerly HPG, one of the world's largest business consulting firms with a dedicated technology practice offering outsourcing, accounting, tax, and advisory services. Discover how EisnerAmper's stage-specific solutions and industry expertise can help you achieve your milestones, whether startup, international expansion, M&A, or IPO. And finally, special thanks to our friends at Earfluence for helping produce this podcast. Peter is the founder of Percona, an open source product that helps companies achieve scale and high performance from their open source databases like Postgres and MySQL. Today, they have over 350 people and their revenues are over 50 million. Here's my discussion with Peter Zaitsev, where we dig into how Peter built Percona into this very successful business across 2 continents. Yeah. So what's it like, going to school in Russia when did you get on a technology track? Was it pretty, in Russia, is it like Europe where you're pretty young, like kind of even like middle of high school level? So let's call it like 15 and you kind of have picked a path.
Yeah, well, probably even before that, right? So I think for me, it was interesting in terms of overcoming the challenges, right? Because, growing up in the Soviet Union, I did not have their computer, right? So I would be somebody who would learn kind of programming languages pretty much by writing the programs like on the paper, right? And then figuring out how they would be run, right? It was a while until I got my...
So you had an imaginary computer. Yeah. So you'd read a book about... What was the first programming language you read a book about?
I think it was a Pascal.
Okay.
In this case, I also did something with BASIC. Then I also like this very, understanding things, right? Mm-hmm. And that's how I got excited about the assembly language. So that's also...
Yeah, if you're going to be writing stuff, you might as well do assembly. Yeah.
No, I mean, it's not really using those days like as a programming language a lot, but I think it's fantastic to understand how things work. Essentially, what was great, I think, in late 80s, early 90s, is things have been so much more simpler than right now, right? I think as any industries, right, we start with simple and then become very complicated, much harder to understand for one person.
Yeah, sometimes it does help to understand how getting down to the metal works, because like you find something inefficient in a program, and ultimately you can figure out what it is, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. If you need to, you can get your hands pretty dirty on that. Okay, so then you got a master's in the Soviet Union as well?
Kind of. I think we have a different system. So I studied for 5 years, right, which can be evaluated as a master's in US, I guess.
Yeah. In the university, was it still very theoretical, like on paper, or did you had access to computers?
No, I mean, I did have access to computers.
Yeah.
Right.
Would these be like IBM PCs, or
yeah?
Like,
I mean, it was it's different, right? I think it was a very interesting. What they have a different mix. We both have IBM computers at the time, right? We also have like a lab sponsored by Sun Microsystems, right? When we had like some old Unixes, I don't even remember what it is, right? But some very kind of slow and painful to work with. So we had a variety in this case, right? And we did have some practical education, but I think it also goes about the education in Russia, where is a very strong kind of theoretical background, right? Like often in US, and that's even kind of start with schools, right? They say, well, we teach you the tools, like, hey, here is a formula you apply how to you solve a square equation, and now go and solve thousands of them, and you'll be very good and very fast solving square equations, but maybe not understanding how and why you solve it, right? In Russia, it's very theoretical. Okay, we want you to actually to be able now to, prove what that is a way to solve them, where did that formula comes from, right? And I think that's a lot carried to their computer science, at least like in the university I went to, right? So make sure you really have a very, very strong foundation, which I think that was wonderful, even though the practical skills I got elsewhere.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I started my first startup when I was maybe like a third year in the college. I got my first kid about the same time. So
you're like 18, 19?
Oh yeah, my first kid was born at 19 when I was 19. Yeah. So
interesting.
But the good thing about the Russian education also, it was kind of more flexible when I see kind of my kids' experience in school, right? So I actually didn't go to school that much, right? I typically would work full time, and then I would take sort of vacation when I would have to prepare for exam, and then I would do that in a week, maybe 2 weeks, go pass exam, and kind of continue on.
Was that a personal choice? You just didn't. You knew you could teach yourself faster than going to the lectures, or like?
Well, I mean, some of that is kind of personal choice. Some of also a need, right? If you are very, young father, you got to be making some money, right? And well, that's you want to work.
So you're a young father, you're in college, and you decided to start a business.
Yes.
So walk me through, and I think that one was called Spylog, is that
yes,
right?
That's right.
So tell me about Spylog and how you came up with this idea.
Yes, well, in that case, I was one of the two partners. I was CTO. We just, I don't even remember, but somehow we came up with that idea. It was interesting to, measure things and Russian internet. And at some point, that was pretty big and famous, right? We really have a lot of folks using that. And that was before like Google Analytics.
So it was measuring internet traffic on a website, or were you pulling down the logs of the browser?
It was kind of similar way as Google Analytics would work, right? You have like a little pixel on your, like a JavaScript on the websites, and we can do the traffic. And we also did some early stage we could do like an audience comparison between sites, help them to do advertising in the Russian market. That was kind of very interesting. And for me, that was also very interesting from technology standpoint, right? Because if you think about that, that's a lot of data. There is a lot of kind of high performance, low latency, right? And
it's this never-ending fire hose of data coming in, and then so you've got this inbound, lots of data, never stopping, and then over here you've got a user that's running queries, and so you've got like basically two inputs kind of happening, and then the queries across all this data could be relatively unstructured. People may want to see a traffic trend. They may want to see user data. They may want to see what's going on this page. Meanwhile, traffic continues to Data is always coming into the database at a tremendous pace.
Yeah. And I would say for me, that was probably like a real education, at least in the startup phase, right? Because like I was like a very young kid, know nothing, even kind of from technology standpoint, probably not knowing nearly as much as I needed to do, right? And then there have to be, so many mistakes made, which I kind of was allowed to do, right? Because I think if you go to a larger enterprise, often you don't get kind of authority to do things which matter if you are just, a young kid.
A 19-year-old person would not be the CTO of a large company.
So that was, that was fantastic.
Yeah. And I see you're wearing an open source hat. Was the database, was this like a MySQL or
I think that was an interesting, also like a foundation for me. What is interesting to know about that time in Russia, right? All software was free software, right? Nobody would pay for licenses, so I could use whatever. Right, even the commercial software, not really in a legal way, but nobody cared.
I remember Windows saying Bill Gates was really frustrated with Russia because they had all these users and only like 2% paid.
Yeah, absolutely right. And the last 2% probably would be from American companies which happen to work in Russia. But in any way, I somehow made a choice to go with open source. Right? So we worked with an early stage with Linux, early stage in MySQL, or what is it, like late 90s, early 2000s. And that is fantastic, right? I think it's to be at this really early stages of technology. That is where so much development happens. It kind of goes fast. And it's also kind of time for heroes, if you will, right? You can be that person who would be the first to solve this particular problem with MySQL, with Linux, right? And then, as the things go, it becomes different, right? You can say, hey, for pretty much every problem, you can just take, the things from a shelf and say, that is what works, do it, apply it, right? Which is, different game.
Yeah. It's like this ethos of the software's free, but instead of owing money for it, I want to make it better and I need to contribute to it. A lot of the open source people feel very strongly about that. And there's almost like this checks and balances of every individual kind of like has their own, I've pulled this down and I've kind of put this back up into
Well, absolutely, right? And I think here is also interesting thing, right? If you look at that time, a lot the open source was hard, right? And what that means is people would self-select. It also would be pretty intelligent, very skilled developers in that thing, right? And then you would talk to your peers, right? They all can, understand what you're talking about, go very deep, right? And solve a problem together, right?
Yeah, there was no Red Hat version where you could just buy it and install it. And
that's right. And now open source changed so much, right? Like, think about, for example, WordPress. Yes, it's open source. It runs a bunch of a web, but most people, just go and buy it from one of providers. They're users of WordPress, but they don't give a shit what it's open source, right? Maybe don't even know what open source is.
Yeah. Back in those days, did you have so let's start with Linux. Did you ever check anything into Linux? And did you ever have interactions with Linus?
Well, you know what? It's kind of interesting. For me, first, yes, I did have interactions with Linux tools, right? At that time in the Linux mailing list, right? But for me, while I could write and I had some software training, I found it's kind of rather slow, right? It's slow process, requires detailed. And because I had this kind of experience with startup, I was given a chance to hire people. I was finding, well, you know what is actually much more interesting and wonderful is just to tell people what to do. So you can have, like a 10 people writing the code you could be writing. And you know what? That is going to be so much faster, right? Yeah. So I was often this kind of guy who would be very opinionated. I could go and say, well, what you are doing is wrong, and it is a kind of better way to do it, right? And, here is why you should do it, right? Mm-hmm. Rather than doing that myself, right? So we often would have some, some low-level discussions, right? I found some, kernel bugs and so on and so forth, right? And yes, that's with Linux, but with MySQL, that was even more. Right, because
it was newer.
That was newer. I was kind of drinking from a fire hose. There's having so many crashes, and I would, Russians are kind of all Russians are assholes in heart, right? So I would go and kind of really.
This is trash. Why are you saying?
Unleash that right on the MySQL mailing list, and a good thing I think is the MySQL founder Monty. He would take that in a good humor, right? And we actually had a very, good productive discussion, right? And
is he a Russian dude? Like, I don't know the MySQL story.
What's that?
Is the MySQL founder a Russian fellow?
No, he's actually a Swedish-speaking Finn.
Swedish-speaking Finn.
Yeah. So, but he's also kind of this guy, right, who appreciates heated discussion, right? So
yeah, a lot of super engineering people, it's almost like the Socratic method in law. Like when I met people that first gone through law school, I was like, what's this Socratic? Like, I understand who Socrates is, but I didn't understand like how they apply it. And it's like, well, you can just like be assholes to each other and then be able to forget about it. And I was like, oh, we do that in the technology world all the time.
Well, that's right. And I think what is interesting in this case, right, if you look at this case now, like on last few years, right, for example, Linus Torvalds, right, a few times say, oh, yeah, I'm kind of sorry. I was kind of too brutal, right, or something. Because he's also a guy, somebody who likes, to tell things not only directly, but maybe how he feels it, right? And if you communicate through, let's say, written media, right? I mean, you only rely your feelings, right? Probably with words, because no other method, right? So it really can become very brutal, right?
Well, what's nice is it's in engineering discussions like that, it's not subjective, it's objective, right? Because if you say to the MySQL founder, this thing's garbage and it's crashing here, that's either true or false. Like there's an answer, right? So,
yes. Yeah.
So he can't, if he says, no, it's not, it doesn't crash, and then we can prove that, right? And if you're right, then the other person's like, okay, mea culpa, you were right, I was wrong. Let's
totally.
So that's what's nice. There's a purity in there that I really like.
Yeah. And I like that. I think the challenge, what happens, you see in some of engineering groups, right? They want to optimized for comfort rather than productivity. Right. And I'm not a big fan of that, as you can imagine.
Yeah. Okay, so you start Spylog. You're still in the Soviet Union, and you're 19. You've got this startup. I imagine you didn't get venture capital. I would imagine nothing like that really existed, right?
That is Russia, right? At that time, it's late 90s, right? And this is kind of I would say this very lowest stage, right, of state of freedom in Russia, right? There, all the rules fall apart, and the news are not created yet. With the company, we had my partner in business, right? He was personally wealthy. He could invest a little bit of money, right? And then he had some angels. We were almost to get money, but you know what? Then 2001 came, right? And 2001 was brutal in US, but it was even worse in Russia, because you know what? Here you could come to Hankin Road, right, and knock on the door and beg. Well, you know what? In Russia, just all Americans, they packed up and left. Right, and it just, no money and nobody to even to ask for. So that was very very problematic, right? And that also was the reason why I end up later leaving Spylog, because we got somebody who, provided the money, who was, associated with, criminal environment.
A little sketchy.
A little bit sketchy, as you would call, right? And then things stop going down. They would say, well, you know what do you want, right? Do you want to give you equity, or do you want to give you a kidney, right? That is kind of discussion happened, right? And for me saying, well, you know what, you can have my equity, but of course I'm not, as an entrepreneur, right? You don't want to work for a startup. You don't have an upside anymore. So I left that business, and ended up being, sold somewhere and integrated something else. So it didn't collapse. Good, but yeah.
Is it still operating today somewhere in the?
Well, it's kind of tricky for me to say. No, it was bought, and then that company was bought by others. So it probably was folded with a different technologies.
Interesting.
But for me, that was also like the thing saying, hey, you know what? I probably do not want to have another business in Russia, right? That was one of the things I was thinking, hey, I should leave a country and do it somewhere else, because my relationship to risk, it's kind of, very in two things. Like when it comes to business risks, I love risks, right? Heavy, risky, whatever. But when it comes to my, health, life, freedom, my family, that is where
pretty attached to my kidney. Yeah.
That is where I want to have a risk. And I think it's interesting, right? In US, you can separate it, right? Hey, you know what? You raise venture capital, right? You know what? You take maybe a lot of risks. Hey, guys, you make a lot of money, or maybe not, but it's not really connected to your question of you keeping your kidney.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So you decided to immigrate. How was that process?
Well, so I immigrated twice, actually.
Oh, right, immigrated twice.
Yeah.
Double immigration.
The first one was after I decided it's time for me to quit Spylog. I went ahead and I went to Michael Videnius-Manti, founder of MySQL, who I knew at that time, asking him if he would give me a reference because I'm looking to look for a job. Mm-hmm. Of course, strategically, I was hoping he would give me the job, right? But I thought that would be kind of put me in a better negotiating position if I'm not begging him for a job, right? But letting him to offer that to me, which he did. And then I started with MySQL remotely from Moscow, Russia first. But I also negotiated saying, hey, you know what? I actually want to leave Russia. So guys, I understand you don't want to invest all this kind of time and money to relocate me. You don't know me. But, if I work out well, you do, right? And it was, pretty obvious. I was, one of the best people in the group I belong to, right? So they had to invest in relocating me. So back in 2004, I moved to Seattle area.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah. And I spent there about 2.5 years. Okay. And by that time, MySQL was growing, and it's have been becoming more corporate and kind of boring for me, right? And I think it's also have been some culture changes, right? Mm-hmm. Because initially, then MySQL was started. I think it was started on this kind of like a classical open source emphasis. Hey, we are here to change the world, right? Those people would not so much care about making money and buying an island, but make it change in the world, right? And that is what we were.
And up until then, your database choices were Oracle. They were kind of like the 800-pound gorilla, and then Microsoft had SQL Server, both of which were crazy expensive. Yeah, you could get into my startups. We would use SQL Server, and you were looking at $50K to $100K entry point, which is huge. And then Oracle was like 2 to 5x that.
That's right.
That's the databases you had.
Yeah, there was no cloud, right? Where you can say, hey, if you want to do it on the small scale, it can be pretty cheap even if you go with commercial.
And the conventional wisdom was you could never they had so much R&D and it was so hard to solve. You could never have anything cheaper, much less free.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think
but you guys proved that wrong. So that was a huge unlock for a lot of things.
Yeah, I would say some of a mistake for that was the open source always follows this kind of a 20-80 rules, right? You can say, hey, you know what? This problem, there was a lot of investment done. The companies figure out what the product should be, what functionality is more or less important. And that is actually a very hard job, right? I think it's figuring out what to build is harder than actually building it in many cases. And now after it's figured out, we figure out we're going to use relational databases which speak SQL, they're going to look this way. Well, you know what, we can now go and build the open source databases which will be good enough for 90% of applications with a small fraction of investment. Mm-hmm. And also as an open source, we can build it together, right?
And if someone does want to get to that last 5%, they can just do it themselves.
Yes, they can. They can do it themselves, right? Look, also, it's not the point of solving everybody's problem, right? I think that's if you look at a lot of niches, where it's still done with a proprietary software, for various reasons, right? Or maybe some proprietary extensions of an open source software. Mm-hmm. But we come to a point where more and more the foundational software, infrastructure software is open source.
Yeah. Okay. So then what was your, just to stay at MySQL, and I definitely want to get to the second immigration story.
Yeah.
So in MySQL, what was your role? Were you on the front end, back end? How did they, how was the company structured?
It's interesting, right? So first, MySQL was like a very engineering company. So everybody was to join as an engineer. So I would join and actually even kind of wrote some code in MySQL.
Yeah.
Right. But where I was kind of more gravitated is working with customers. Right. Because I think it's one of, my superpowers, if you will, right? I am good with technology, but I'm also reasonably good with people, compared to many.
You can turn off the Russian a-hole and then be nice to customers.
Yeah. Or I can at least make
Some engineers can. You don't put those in front of customers because they'll tell the customer they're dumb. Yeah, that's a huge problem.
No, I mean, I did it many times, but you know what? I think it's like, you know what? Sometimes I think if you have that, if you're on a call with somebody, right, and you have this like a overwhelming respect, right? Then that can be
nicely tell them they're wrong.
Yeah, that can be cute, right? That can be different. So, but in any way, I moved to do things which are kind of were not code related, right? So I was doing a lot of consulting, customer support. I also developed a lot of training material, not training material that will do too much writing, but actually questions, right, for certifications. Right. And that was kind of one of my challenges if you look at why I left MySQL. And I think that's often happens with as a company became more mature, right? You go from generalists to more specific. So I was saying, okay, do you want to be, consultant? Do you want to be support? Well, I kind of want to do both. No, you can't, right? And then you get a closer and closer, right? And you are put in the box, right? And
then suddenly it's not just any customer, it's this segment. And then now it's not that. It's government customers that are in Seattle on this side of town. Yeah.
Yeah.
Your world is here and it starts to get so incredibly narrow.
That's right. Yeah. And that was not very satisfactory for me. I felt it would, it's time for me to go and, go something on my own, right? I think deep down, I also knew, right, while I had to sort of take this, the corporate job to get out of Russia, it is not my destiny, right? I am this, person who likes to do my own stuff and probably likes the freedom and independence, above anything else, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's I think you can only reach that as an entrepreneur, right? So I needed to figure out a way to get out of MySQL and hopefully stay in US or at least somewhere. US at the time and even kind of still now is not very friendly, right, for entrepreneurs, right? There is no a startup visa, right, as in some countries. So instead, I actually moved to United Kingdom, right? We had at that point the high-skilled visa program, right, where I could just, get, some points and boom, I moved to UK and I can do whatever. I'm not tied to my job as I was tied in MySQL, right? And that's...
Is your family moving along through all these direct
parts? Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah, of course. We moved together. And as usually, right, as I said, the first startup, right, they had a very young kid. The second, in this case, was similar. So when we moved to UK, my daughter was having a 8 month or something, and I was looking to start the business with almost no savings, right? I can just admire my wife, right, for trusting in me, able to figure it out, because I don't know, for me, I think I perform well with my back against the wall. So, hey, Peter, you have to build a business and start getting income, money flowing in a month because you don't have any other freaking choice. That is the best outcome for me, right? I think for some people it's kind of stressful, and right, maybe just stall. But for me,
the amount of work you can do and the ideas you say yes to becomes unbounded, and that's where some of the best ideas come from.
Yeah, so that's exactly. You
literally have no bounds of what you will do to solve problems when you get in those kind of against the wall things. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so that's when we got started with Percona was born in August 2006.
Okay, I didn't know it was in London. Where were you in London or?
Yeah, I was in London area, kind of.
Yeah. You picked the most expensive part of the UK as well, so that's always fun.
Well, I was kind of
On the outskirts of London.
Yeah, outskirts of London, right? I could try to get as far from London as possible, but then if I would have some work in the city, I could still get there. But you know what? To my surprise, actually, as I still got most of the business outside of UK. And that is also business I liked, right? I think UK changed, right? Now there's like some more startup culture, but at that time it was, just suits, right? It's kind of, kill me now, right? Yes, you could make a lot of business and, banking, insurance and so on and so forth, but that was not.
The businesses are very conservative, and they kind of like have the innovation cycle of hospitals. They like are glacial adopters of technology.
Yeah. I mean, I remember there was like sometimes somebody hired me to do the job, right? And they like allocated a week for that. That was like to do the job for 2 hours. Then there was like about 140 freaking pages of a paperwork, right, to fill out. Yeah, and then it's kind of, do nothing for remaining 3 days, right? And they say, well, you know what? Can you please do something? Because you just say, hey, guys, I'm done. What else do you want me to do, right? And you will make other people look bad. Yeah.
Have you ever done the thing? A lot of times you do business in London, and like their form of what we would call notary in the US, like you actually go visit a barrister and it's like a dude in the wig and stuff.
Yeah.
I've had to do that. Like we set up a London office and they're like, all right, you're gonna have to fly to London and you have to go see a barrister. And it's like, what? And like, there's a guy like literally, and he like, asked me 4 questions and like, boom, boom. And like, it's crazy how like it like kicks out to like some almost, 1800s level process sometimes in these European countries.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of a traditional, or I think in the UK they like things to look traditional, right? It's kind of very interesting. Like when they build a house, like a new one, right? And then you look at that 3 years later, you wouldn't recognize it. It looks exactly the same, right, as the houses they built a century ago, right? Yeah. And they like it.
Yeah. What was the idea that led you to Percona?
Well,
and Percona is today different than what it was?
Oh, it was, of course, very different. Well, so first, to be frank, right, I was thinking, hey, I will run Percona as this kind of like a very simple services business, because these are very easy to start, right? And I can, start feeding my family like now, and then I figure out and maybe go and build some different product business or something like that, right? But then, it's kind of took a life of its own, right? In this case, and evolved, of course. Now you're asking, what was the idea? Now, stepping back a little bit, maybe to throw you kind of Russian experience, right? What do you really know about United States if you live in Russia? Well,
cowboys, guns.
Oh, yeah. But you know what? You also like watching movies, right? And it feels like this is like a sort of like a country with, rule of law, right? And everything's supposed to be kind of so wonderful, right? In this case. And then when you would come to the... so I was surprised in that our technical industry, right, is what, when you have a lot of consulting done, it's actually extensions of a sales team. Yeah. Right. If you hire the Oracle consultants, for example, they're not going to say, well, you know what? Actually, Oracle is not the best choice here. Actually, you know what? For your particular use case, the Microsoft SQL would be a better choice. Yeah. Of course, they're not going to do that for you, right? They are out there actually to make sure you use as much Oracle as possible, right? And they are, you're as deep into Oracle as possible, so you cannot migrate, right? So it's kind of always extension of that sales team, right?
Yeah. And they would never bite the hand that feeds them, because all their leads come from Oracle.
That's right.
And if they ever sold something that's not Oracle, that would get cut off from
from our side, kind of getting that, maybe building on the open source spirit, I was thinking, well, what if you would really, put the customer first, right? And act as, fiduciary, if you will, for a customer. Right. So that was the first idea. Say, hey, you know what? We are going to be working for you. You pay us money. That is going to give you the best advice we can, right? And you know what? We're not tied to any kind of particular technology to the best of our ability, right? At least we're not, compensated in this way, right? And the second one was for me is also like really how to build the best customer experience, right? Because I found, especially with larger organizations, if you look at support, there is like so much have you tried turning it on and off again, right? Or people really, reading some text from a knowledge base and you can really hear what they don't even understand what the hell they're reading about, right? Just having so much of that kind of low quality support where I felt we could make a difference. Well, and I think we did, right? That was a foundation of our early stage success.
Yeah, cool. All right, so you start as a service business and then you're in the UK. One thing kind of in this era I had a question about is today Postgres is like, seems to be almost at parity with MySQL. I don't know if that's controversial in your world or not. I know the history a bit of MySQL. Where did Postgres come from? What's the story on that?
Yeah, well, the Postgres was very interesting, right? The PostgreSQL was coming from a number of larger universities and such, and at that time it was still coming to the market, right?
Did they do it because of was it like some PhDs as a thesis, or like was there some need that MySQL didn't need, or?
No, I think look, I mean, if you look at this case, right? I mean, I don't think things in open source happen. It's like somebody looked at that kind of need, right? And those are people who are having some, market analysis, product analysis,
some
right?
Organic thing, right?
Yeah, some do, right? Like right now. But at that time, it's like, well, I have built this kind of like a baby, right? This is kind of my thing, right? And I go around and I look at everybody use it and try to use it, right? And then somebody wins, right? It's like even if you look at operating systems, right? Well, there is, of course, Linux, but you know what? There was, and is still FreeBSD as well. And there's also, if you look at that, there's like a whole bunch of even kind of smaller operating systems and stuff. It just, went nowhere, right? So there was just different community building Postgres, right? It came from a different...
was it European? Like what were the universities?
No, a lot of that stuff was actually, there's like a famous person in a database ecosystem, right? Michael Stonebreaker, right? And he kind of did research projects for many of them, databases, right? And that's kind of one of the origins of Postgres, right? It was kind of Postgres, it was Postgres kind of 95 or something. This was kind of changing different names. I don't even remember all of them anymore. Yeah. But in the end, it kind of went out from academia and was found as this kind of very unusual community.
Yeah.
Right, which we developed.
Have you worked with those people as well, or not as much as the MySQL?
No. I mean, at that time, I picked the MySQL.
Yeah.
Right. And their PostgreSQL was, at that time, I think approaches was like this, right? The Postgres was much more elitist. It was like the database for smart people. If you can't figure this out, well, you know what, you should not use Postgres, right? That's something, hey, we have this like SQL and you have to understand it and so on and so forth, right? And then the MySQL was, it didn't really have a very good SQL support. It was kind of hackish. It was like a very user-focused. Hey, you have this kind of thing to do. You need to build a web page, or something. We just figure out how you can do it with MySQL.
Yeah.
It was kind of very practical, very hackish. It built
more
a lot
blue
of
collar, like get stuff done. And Postgres
get stuff done.
It has to be perfect in this way, and we're very,
And obviously, over time, kind of now decades, a lot of things much more coalesced, right? Yeah. Like where you would PostgreSQL became much more user friendly, and then MySQL getting a lot more, more robust and getting more advanced features. But I think it's this kind of MySQL versus PostgreSQL competition that is kind of yet another very, very big story we can go into.
What's the split of the two now, if you know it? Like, is it pretty even, or like does it depend on?
No, I think it's kind of interesting, right? In this case, if you look at right now, momentum has switched, right? When we were starting in those kind of 2006, right? For example, there was a lot of that stuff from PostgreSQL ecosystem. How can we catch up with MySQL because it was so much bigger?
Yeah.
Right now, you can see there is still a lot of MySQL, especially because of that huge amount of application built on MySQL, right, for over 20 years. But if you look at where momentum is, where the new applications are being built, it's Postgres. And now it is a kind of a question in this case. Well, how can MySQL, what can MySQL do to catch up, right, or at least kind of slow that.
Interesting. That's my perception. So it's good. Interesting to have that value.
Yes.
So 2 more nerdy questions, then we'll get on with the entrepreneurship.
Sure.
So people don't realize, I think, that you're kind of like you're an authority on this stuff. So do you have code that's in Linux running today?
Oh, in the Linux.
Can you look in the kernel and see that's my code?
Probably not in Linux, but there is a little bit in MySQL. Yeah. I mean, cool. As I mentioned, I like to.
That's a big badge of honor for a hardcore engineer, software engineers. That's cool. Yeah. And then you're frequently invited, even kind of in the early days of Percona. I think, I don't know when this started, but you're always a speaker at a lot of these industry events about anything related to open source databases and a lot of these topics. What is it you talk about at these events, and like what is your kind
Well, I think it's interesting. So let me kind of take it back, right? Because it's also maybe kind of relevant, right? So for me, with my work at MySQL at the time, right, I also had the opportunity to create one of the early blogs in that field called MySQL Performance Blog, right? And that was wonderful, right? That is where what I later kind of had Percona grown from, right? If you will, as my source of leads and everything, right? And I also
it's an early, what today founders would call content strategy or inbound.
That's
is by being the technical expert on one piece of MySQL. You just had leads, so flowing in for free.
It was fantastic, and also at the same time I got also on a conference circuit, right? First speaking on behalf of MySQL, right, and then also on my own. A lot of that focus was first focused on some very specific technical in-depth presentation, how to design, how to run your applications, how to optimize queries or wherever.
So
right?
You're in the performance. These are people that are like pushing MySQL to the edges, either in size or performance needs, and you're starting to build this database of, well, you should shard it. I don't know if that's a thing.
That's right.
You should. Here's how to segment the database to get the most performance on this. If it's disk bound, throw some more memory out. Like sometimes maybe there's a hardware recommendation. Sometimes it's an architectural.
So I think I covered like a pretty large set of topics, but kind of focused on that. And then gradually it has been changing, right? Like if you look at all for so many years later, as a company grown and my responsibility changes, I don't spend as much time kind of hands-on anymore, right? So you often talk maybe a little bit high-level questions, right? I also got involved, besides databases, a lot in the open source community at large, kind of, talking on topics related to that. That's also what I do a lot.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. Do you still do the blog today?
I do, yeah. I mean, I actually like to do have like several ones I contribute. There's like a Percona blog, right? Then I have my own personal blog.
Do you still have the MySQL performance blog? Or?
MySQL performance blog over years, it was just wrapped into Percona blog.
Okay, so but it's kind of you've been doing it. You're in the cycle where you kind of write on a pretty regular basis. Interesting. Yeah. When did you start doing that? That was like 2006 timeframe, or?
Well, that was before, right? So that probably was 2005-ish, maybe. Yeah. It was like at least a year before I left MySQL.
Yeah, the other thing that writing does is it makes you learn a lot more, right? Because the best way I had Robbie Allen on here, and he said the best way to learn something, he wrote a lot of books for O'Reilly. And, the best way, if you're going to write a book, suddenly you have to like know something flat to be able to ingest all this information, and then you have to like spit it back out so another human can
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, and I also have a O'Reilly book. For me, one is enough.
You wrote an O'Reilly. What was your animal?
The animal. It's what is it? Like it's something like a hawk.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. It's nice. A nice raptor. So was it around MySQL?
Yeah, it's a high performance MySQL.
Interesting. Wow, that's a good one.
For years, that was like pretty much like a best selling book on that topic. But you're right? I think that's always now I encourage all the engineers and to really understand something, write about it, teach people about it, because that's fantastic. You often, go through that stuff and say, I actually don't understand that. I can't explain it.
Yeah.
Right. And then you have to, dig some more. So, yeah.
There's also a concept of, it's like compounding, right? So yes, you've been at this 19 years, but there's a compounding that starts to happen. It's hard to explain this to people. Like everyone understands financial compounding,
Yeah.
or like, interest compounding or something like that. But there's this knowledge compounding. And what I have found, I've been doing kind of similar thing, is you almost like can predict the future because you've seen it. And it actually is more than those 19 years. It feels like you've got 50 years in there. It's like hard to explain to people, but this may be landing with you. And like, I bet someone could walk up to you and say, I'm having this performance problem. And you could probably ask 3 questions and you would give them, you know the pattern immediately. And you can give them like, 5 bullets that will be life-changing for them. Is that your superpower now? Because
Absolutely.
You've been at this for 19 years?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I think that is always severe. I think you get a lot of that knowledge out there. I think a lot of value also comes because when you had a chance to look at the systems kind of through a history, you often understand it kind of much more, right, than they have. Because often developers come and they say, well, that is a problem I'm having. But then if you look about that, how that's going to evolve, right, in a kind of few years, right, you see some complexity which they, don't think about.
Yeah. And, if you wrote a web analytics company, when was that? Spylog was like, 2001 or like the late 90s.
Yeah.
That was hard. But like, today's traffic on the internet is, 100, 1,000x.
Yeah.
So what's also nice is you've seen, the things you were talking about in performance in 2005 are not the same problems people are having today because the amount of data we're producing is compounding. And it's a whole nother set of problems.
Well, and I think, it's kind of very interesting how the performance problem kind of have been, separated, right? Because on one side, if you look at this kind of a real high performance on the internet, maybe kind of stock trading, gaming, and so on, so there is like a very important thing to squeeze that kind of a last percent, right? Because the scale is so massive. On the other hand, we have this kind of like a absolutely bloated 0.5 gigabyte Facebook application on your phone, which you can say, oh my gosh, how can, right? This is like a so powerful device, right? And it's kind of still freaking slow, right? Because of, how technologies have been optimized for simplicity, right? For developers, rather than performance, right? In certain areas.
Yeah, interesting. Cool. So so you're in London. You've got Percona, and you've got your performance blog. So leads are coming in. You're turning them into consulting gigs. When did Percona become a product?
Well, So first, I would say what happened is I moved back to the United States. Right, I spent only about a year and a half in UK. I felt like, wow, there's a lot of customers I'm finding in US, and it seems to be kind of more fun. So I ended up, getting myself as kind of like a manager visa to go and move to United States in 2008.
Did you have to hack it by opening a US subsidiary for Percona and then bringing yourself over as a manager of that?
It was kind of like a funny, right? Because it's like a government would require a business plan. And, like as a bootstrapper, I mean, it's like, well, you don't have investors, you don't have a board, right? You don't need that kind of, pages and pages of business plan. So I remember I hired somebody like for maybe like $500 from Costa Rica or something, to come up with some, bullshit business plan. And I look at that and say, it seems some graph, may make sense. Well, I'm sure it's going to be good enough for immigration officials, right? They're probably only also going to scroll through it, right? And
it's funny.
Anyway, it went through, right? I got my visa, moved to US to California, right at that time, and it was also a very interesting time. Like I think it's kind of like if you look back at those kind of what you achieve, there's like so many cases where luck is involved.
Yeah.
Because for me, on one extent, it was 2008, right? That was this sort of like a crisis, right? A lot of people want to save money. Well, why? What is one of the ways you save money? You don't use Oracle, right? So there was a lot of business.
Migrating off the big iron into the.
I mean, it was not so. We didn't do a lot of migrations, right? In this case, but if people are still building a new app, new solutions, right? I mean, technology kind of never stops, right? And they would use MySQL for that. That was one.
So they were going hybrid. They had some Oracle legacy stuff, but the new stuff was going to be on
And then
cheaper.
the other big thing is what when MySQL was acquired by Sun. And that is also kind of a big thing because, like when one company acquires another company, there is always a lot of
I forgot about that.
a lot of shit happening, right? So there have been a lot of opportunity for us saying, hey, you know what? While they're having those like a digestion period, right? And, things are kind of not so solid with what they're doing, right? Well, come to Percona, and that's where you get solutions, right?
Yeah.
And that is also then, as you said, about the product. A lot of our products are born almost kind of by accident, if you will, right? Because we were really focused on, how can we provide value to our customers, right? And often you would get a MySQL, you tell them, hey, that's how you configure that, how install it, how you design schema, tune queries, whatever, right? But then it's kind of not enough, right? The kind of Oracle, not Oracle, Sun acquired MySQL. It kind of became slow. They didn't fix certain things. There was like a lot of some other complicated, political structure in MySQL space, right? And that is how we end up and said, hey, we actually have to create our own version, right? That is where Percona Server for MySQL was born because, well, just we have to in this case. And then we also, somewhere around that time, also moved from, pure consulting model to support, right? Which is recurrent subscription revenue, which is, like whole different game if you think about it.
So you kind of like red-hatted MySQL.
Yes.
And MySQL is interesting because they were like going to be one of these where a lot of these open source, there's a pure open source project piece and then a commercialization piece that are different.
That's right.
Yeah. And then like WordPress has the pure part, and then what is it? WP. There's another entity.
WP Engine.
Yeah. WP Engine.
Yeah. But I think in this case, what you're saying is there are two kinds of open source projects, right? You can think about more like a foundation driven or community driven. You think about Linux, Kubernetes, Postgres, and then there are a vendor, right? Like MySQL. Well, it's owned by a specific vendor. Now it happened to be Oracle, right? And they do whatever they want with it, right? You have no freaking say. While it's kind of very different in PostgreSQL or Kubernetes, right? When there is some sort of public governance process So
you guys took MySQL and then you basically solved a lot of the performance. You took your best practices for performance and kind of baked them in.
Yeah. I mean, it started with performance. Then we also looked, as the customers tell you what they need. We had a lot of improvements in terms of security, havability, and
and this is the part of stuff you didn't have to copy left it back into the core. You kind of, it was your proprietary code.
Not quite, right? Okay. So because it's kind of built together in a single product, right? It also has to follow the same license, which is GPL, right? So it was our extension, but the end product was and still remained open source.
Okay.
Right. So this is kind of where Percona model has been very unusual, right? We have this if you look at the Oracle, what we're doing, right, or Sun did before that, we have MySQL Community and MySQL Enterprise. MySQL Community is open source, available for everybody, but it's kind of crippled. Yeah. All the kind of good stuff goes in the MySQL Enterprise, right? And that is proprietary.
Yeah.
What you'll do with Percona, we can say, well, essentially provide you with like the same stuff that exists in the enterprise version, but it is open source, right? And that's how we can differentiate.
Okay.
Now, some people
could just use it without paying you.
Yes, right. And this kind of is a question, say like, well, Peter,
how do you make money off free software?
Is that a good business model? Like, how is it going to work? Well, but reality is, if you're speaking about like a larger enterprise customers, which is like our bread and butter, right, for this, is they are not going to go it alone, right? Imagine somebody in a bank going and kind of downloading something off the internet, right, and then just say, hey, if this thing crashes, I just go on the forums and hopefully somebody responded to me quickly.
Right. And if that employee leaves, they're toast.
That's right.
They also
so
need
if you look in this case, yes, there is this kind of an open source project, and it's kind of wonderful, but the serious users, they want commercial relationship, right? They have compliance needs, right? They want, just to make sure if something goes, there is somebody to call, somebody to blame, and so on and so forth, right? And with that, even though we have our software is open source, you can just, go and run it in a while. We have very good recurrent revenue business, right, with similar margins as an enterprise, right, and a pretty high retention. I think there's also something else which is kind of interesting in this case, right? Because if you look somebody like Oracle, like, have you ever thought like why like support often with those kind of proprietary vendors is so bad? Well, because in many cases you just can't get away with them. For them, you are stuck.
Yeah,
right?
If you have a monopoly, there's no reason to spend money on support. But they have high maintenance fees. Oracle famously has almost 50% of your licenses.
That's right. I mean, there is a high maintenance fee, high subscription, but you know what? Because you are stuck with a product, right? You cannot fire them. You have to kind of repat all your system. Then it often goes with the support becomes kind of crap. Yep. In our case, right, because that is a core proposition, they don't have to rip out the software, right? And if we don't make sense, right, then, well, you know what? They can just fire us.
Yep.
And I think that puts you in a situation when you have to kind of be great or die. Mm-hmm. And I actually like it, right? Because, that's it doesn't leave space for mediocrity, right? Where you could otherwise gravitate to.
Do you have competitors that have taken your open source and compete with you on the?
I mean, there are some. Yes, there are number of companies which go ahead and run Percona.
Sounds good in practice until someone takes your stuff and competes with you with it. It's a little bit hard to swallow. Being a Russian guy.
No. I mean. I think that is kind of works as designed because
it does force you to up your game. Absolutely.
I go and think about this, like for a software I produce, Percona server for MySQL, 90% of that is actually Oracle's work, right? Like I cannot say, I just did that all myself and they kind of stealing it bastards. Yeah. No, right? I'm standing on the shoulder of the giants, and you know what? As Percona has grown, that is kind of a sort of your medal of achievement, and somebody's staying on your shoulders as well, right? Yeah. That is how open source ecosystem is supposed to work, right? And in many cases, they serve I have somebody in India or in some other companies, they serve local markets, right? So we wouldn't be very good at serving them. Yeah. Anyway, so it's kind of cool with me.
Cool. So you had your first product. You're in California. What year is it now?
I moved to California 2008. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Before we go there, did the movement, the cloud? So AWS came out around 2006. But even then, it was simple storage. The true AWS was coming out around this time. Did that would have a huge impact because a lot of these open source systems are the default standard for most of these cloud projects.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting, right? Because cloud came, if you think about a MySQL market, or let's say Percona market, in kind of two different ways, right? On one extent, you can say, hey, now we have the infrastructure. Your EC2 nodes, right? A storage, whatever, is much easier accessible. Yeah. And then you go ahead and you use that with open source software, and it's kind of awesome. And that's actually created the market, because you know what, very few people would go ahead and say, I'm spinning out with EC2 Windows and I'm going to EC2 instance and I'm going to put Windows and Microsoft SQL, right, to Oracle on it, right? That was kind of the first stuff, right? But then also you have a RDS and Aurora come about, right? Mm-hmm. And for me, it was very interesting, this thinking this innovator's dilemma thing, kind of happening in practice, right? When you can think, that something is a toy. Right, you know what? It's kind of a very basic. It's not really, tuned well. It's cannot handle large.
And for folks that don't know, what are those things?
So the RDS stands for Relational Database Servers, right? What that can also be described as what they call a fully managed database in the cloud. So they just provision a database for you, and you are using that. You don't have to be responsible for.
You don't even care what it is underneath.
Yeah, for maintaining.
And this is like Amazon's.
Yes, that's Amazon's, right? And then the next step up from that is what is called Aurora. That is when they just don't give you the open source kind of vanilla MySQL or Postgres, right? But it has a number of bells and whistles for better performance and some other things.
Would you say that kind of competes with the Percona?
Yes. Yeah. Of course. Look, I mean, I think if you look at reality, like our business changed a lot, right? And I think if you look at our early business, right? If you look at the customers who were Percona customers in 2008, a vast majority of them are running in the cloud and Amazon right now, right? Where Percona was successful is moving up in the enterprise, right? Because there have been many companies which just have been, I would say, like washed away, right, by the cloud because they just
suddenly everything got very easy.
Yeah, make it easy, right? And I would tell to people, hey guys, remember at some point somebody would come to us and say, well, we are, let's say, going to run like a small website. Can you please, set up for us a secure and highly available cluster of two databases, right? And then you go ahead and do it. Now, boom, it's all gone, right? Because there's no point to hire some expert to do that.
Check.
Yes, you just go in a web, right? And most likely you don't even build your own website for e-commerce. You go and, do Shopify, right? Or there's like so many of those like a platforms for pretty much anything you can.
It seems like your sweet spot. If there's a pyramid of companies, the ones that are going to need performant databases are going to be financial services would be a big one. Anything that has compliance, because the logging and that kind of stuff. So some of that can be government-y kind of stuff. And what are some of the other? Are those like the two? What are the big
I would
verticals?
say healthcare.
Healthcare
in this case, right? A lot of I would say also the like larger technology companies. They typically have like some very complicated database installations and such. I think what is also interesting in this case is I think living in a bubble, right? As you always do, right? It's hard to understand how different cloud adoption in the different regions in the world is. Because in certain cases you have we run everything in the cloud. In some other cases, people are kind of much more worrisome about it. In some cases, you see large like government or regulated industries, they even kind of not allowed to run in the cloud providers. And often it's kind of saying, well, we are not allowing you to run in American cloud providers because, we don't quite trust the American government. And we don't actually have any local cloud providers to speak of, right? So you still end up running that in legacy data centers.
Yeah. And then everything always has another edge. So even though cloud simplified, there's a complexity too, right? So there's now hybrid. So you're on-prem and off-prem. So that's one complexity. Another one is you're multi-zone. So now the database has to work across different zones. And then there's like a disaster recovery. So if a zone goes down, then you have to have something. And then there's like the whole, backup scenario where the database, you have your active, inactive, and all that kind of jazz. So, so that seems like that would have all been good for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you're probably already thinking about all these things across data centers. So it's relatively easy for you to extract it up into the cloud. Whereas a lot of these other systems don't really anticipate that level of complexity.
Well, and I would say this, right? So if you look at Percona business, one is we do significant amount of business with Amazon folks, which people would run those kind of managed versions, right? It's kind of interesting, right, how it's marketed, right? Because on one extent, the Amazon likes to tell you, like a Google, whatever, it's kind of fully managed. That means I don't need to have a DBA, that's cool. So who's going to be responsible for security? That's going to be shared responsibility. What about performance? Well, that's going to be shared responsibility too. Of course, you have to optimize your own queries, right? And so on and so forth, right? So you kind of get that somewhat kind of a bait and switch, right?
The hardware is fully managed, but they're happy to have you not perform it so they can give you more hardware.
Right,
There's a misalignment there too.
Yeah, and
they would love to spin up a very high-end database entity for you.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I think what I like the token is what cloud vendors, they like tuning by credit card. because that is their motivation. If you say, hey guys, have you tried going to the highest instance size possible, right? If not, then, well, that is probably your number one solution. And then only then we'll talk to you about how it's possible to, actually optimize your application, optimize your database.
They do not want you to optimize in a way.
Yeah. So anyway, I mean, for us, we do have some customers, right, when they actually provide that more of a white glove treatment, saying, hey, you know what, we really want somebody to even kind of provide the interface. We have developers, we don't have a clue about databases. We need somebody to deal with that fully managed environment, right, but actually to deal with what we have to do on our side of that shared responsibility. But what we also have a lot is, I would say, like a different approach to the cloud, right? Because I think it's interesting, like how technology is somewhat kind of circular, right? Because if you remember 90s, right, the late 90s, at that time you have those kind of awesome operating systems, like a Windows, databases like SQL Server or Oracle kind of came about, and we would go ahead and go and use it, right? And then this kind of disruption wave of open source came. Yep. Now we had this kind of a second wave. You have cloud vendors like Amazon, Google, and go ahead and build for us is a very proprietary, but this kind of very nice, well-integrated cloud, right? And then they want to use kind of like a highly differentiated features, which we can, charge you a lot for, in which I can make sure that cloud is not commodity. So you have no ability to move, from Amazon to Google or Azure, right, or whatever, right?
We're kind of back to the Oracle trap, yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Well, and people understand that. So there is an alternative thing that in an open source, right? We have this. You may heard about talking about like a cloud native. That is something which is built at the open source technology, right? And that is something which allows you to use cloud as commodity. Saying, hey, cloud is good, right? It's wonderful to be able to, spin up 100 servers, right, with a single click, right? But we do not need to pay for all that like a software bring in. We can bring open source, right? And that is where
it's a portability layer.
Yes, you may heard about like technologies like Kubernetes, and that is where we see that a lot, right? Yeah. Because if you look at the large organization, you can say, wow, if you actually drink that Amazon Kool-Aid to its fullest, right, and use all those very proprietary, very expensive services we want it's going to be super expensive now. And guess what? We're not stupid. We're rising prices every year, right? So it's going to be more and more expensive and harder to move. While if we are still sticking on the open source software, we are in a good negotiating power. We want to raise the price. We can say, hey, actually, do you guys really want us to, go to Google? We can. I mean, it's very portable. Mm-hmm. And we see a lot of more companies making that choices, right? And again, sort of like a resurgence interest of running their like a truly open source databases just in a different way.
This is where the blogging is helpful. So you can be a thought leader on this, and you can say, here's the best way to structure things so you don't get stuck with a cloud provider, and you can almost like move the market towards kind of where you want it to be. But it's also the right thing,
But I think
for certain customers.
It also becomes this kind of very interesting, like it goes in the market the same thing. If you look at 90s, right, there was always kind of like a standard way in kind of media control by Microsoft and alike, right? You have a very kind of first, like you become Microsoft certified professional. They try to get the kids at school, right? Like a Microsoft had a presence and gave all that kind of, Microsoft tools for free in our university, right? And so on and so forth. And it took a while to break down that thing with the open source technology, right? Which happened, I think, in the late 90s, early 2000s, right? Where a lot of people say, wow, that is actually cool. That is kind of usable. And we don't have to deal with all that kind of, like the expensive corporate crap, right? Now we had a new generation of developers, which have been educated in the genre of the proprietary cloud. You go and you become, Amazon's Borg, right, do this like Amazon well-architectured infrastructure, which of course going to use maximal lock-in solutions and not a lot of open source.
Use their queuing thing, use all their stuff.
That's right, yes. But again, we can see people now say, well, you know what, there is actually this kind of a better way, right? And we can do things and do it, more cost-effective, better. And so on, right? And I think that is a big change which is happening right now.
Yeah. Okay. So it's 2008. Your Percona's in California. How do we get to North Carolina?
Well, how do we get to North Carolina? I think it's like a couple of things. Like, well, you can rationalize things, right? You can tell the truth.
Whatever version you want to tell. the PR story or like the...
yeah. So, like if you want to rationalize it, right, I can say, well, I wasn't as customer facing anymore, right? So I did not need to be with customers on site in California as much. And then moving to East Coast, that also allowed me better coverage for my team in Europe, right? Which had plenty of people out there.
Do you have a team over in Russia or somewhere? Or like
we are a distributed company, right? We have people now in maybe like 45 different countries, but there's a big number of people in Europe, of course. Yeah, so that is like one of the story. But the other part of the story is I didn't quite like California, right? Like I think it's kind of different culture. I think this kind of like a venture funded startup culture, right, is not what I particularly like.
You're like the lone bootstrapper out there.
Yeah, and I think
also it's like super hippie, and then you're like a relatively conservative Russian type person.
But I think it's also like there's like a lot of traffic. We didn't quite like how you have don't have any kind of seasons out there. And
you're consistent. You're like Mr. Database guy forever, right? Which is good. And out in California, like every 4 years, it's a new thing. Like it's it's for a while it was e-commerce, and then it was social networking, and then it was crypto, blockchain, whatever, and then now it's all AI, right? And being the database guy when it's crypto, they're like they're like, oh, that's super old fashioned. You don't have no idea what you're doing.
Yeah, well, I think
there's like this attitude that like if you're not doing the latest thing, you're like it's stupid. Yeah.
I think the interesting thing about the database, it's also like shovels, which are usable for any gold rush. Yeah, there have been, I would say, for us, it's influx for crypto companies, right, which are storing information about NFTs and stuff, right, in their databases, right, or doing some blockchain analysis, right, and then some crypto winter comes, some of them dies, right, but then now there's like a lot of AI companies saying,
I get that it didn't hurt the business, but you as an entrepreneur, you're not like, if you're not on the latest thing, then it's like you're not a hipster.
Yeah. No, that's fair. But anyway, I mean, and it was a while back. I think I've been here for like about 12 years now. Also, I even kind of forget.
Why'd you pick the Triangle of all the places on the East Coast?
So
read an article?
It's kind of
Red Hat?
Silly. I would say like first of North Carolina, right?
Yeah.
Once upon a time, I asked a person I trust, and well, you know what? If you ever would pick a place to live in the United States, you don't have a family or job, right? Where that place would be. And he told me North Carolina. I'm saying, interesting. I never kind of heard much about this place or something, right? And so at one point, right, we decided to go with my wife and kind of visit the place, right? So we came here in Durham, liked it enough, so I did a little bit of research and say, hey, here we go. It's also like a field for me, like a field basic parameters, right? Because I would look at that and say, well, you know what? If you go to the north, right? Well, one, weather sucks. Then there's like always kind of a traffic, and it's
you're a Russian dude. You're supposed to like wear the jacket and the hat. And like
yes. Well,
you got out of there and like you lost.
Yes, I like to come to winter, right, and to ski, right. I don't want winter in my driveway every day.
You don't want her to come
right?
to you.
It's kind of different, right? Yeah. Cool. So we didn't want to go up north, like, and then Florida. Well, it's to Florida.
No seasons, yeah.
So then they look at what is in the middle, and then I also looked for things which kind of relatively startup friendly, but also not very big and crowded. And I think this Triangle really was this very good fit, all right, by this kind of like analytical stuff. And then we just liked it, and at some point, throw a dice, if you will.
Could always move again, if you didn't like it.
Yeah.
Well, we're glad you're stuck here. When did you move?
Yeah, I was saying like it's about probably 12 years ago. Yeah, maybe kind of 2011, because I remember it was like a still kind of reeling from that 2008 financial crisis at that time.
Yeah. All right. So 2011, you move here, and I imagine you're talking less to customers because the organization's gotten bigger. Like, how big is Percona today, up to the extent you're comfortable sharing? Like, headcount or size? Or?
Yeah. So we're about 350 people, right? Somewhere in about 50 mil revenue, between 50 and 100 revenue wise.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's just so you have bootstrapped a 350 person company with over 50 million in revenue.
Yeah.
That's not easy. Congratulations on that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, the only other person I know that's done that is Joe Colopy at Bronto.
Yeah.
At that scale. And obviously SaaS. Dr. Goodnight. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's the OG bootstrapper. Yeah.
I think it's I think one thing, if you talk about the bootstrapping, I think what best money is customer money, right? And that's fantastic. And if you can fund from your customers, it's fantastic. And we were lucky. Plus, our business was kind of weird enough, right? So we didn't have to invest in a lot of in that kind of building IP before it can be used.
Yeah.
But it takes a long time, right? And I think like what I was reflecting on this, coming here, I think it's when you're young, right? And you're like, and look, I started Percona, I was like 26, right? You think you kind of
you were already a 7-year veteran of startups at that point.
Yeah.
So the benefit of starting young, you've had a lot of time around the track.
I did have experience, but even in that time, right? I think it's kind of still you feel like there is infinity of a time any place. Yeah. Or maybe I did that, right? And so, hey, in this case, like, well, yes, it does take longer time. But
it becomes like another child. Like I had Channel Advisor for over 20 years. And at some point, it's almost like, all right, time to go to college.
Yeah. So yeah, and it's also like if you're having fun, that I think is important thing. And as you mentioned, there's like some other ventures on my LinkedIn. Not all of them are bootstrapped, right? Because I think bootstrapping versus like getting capital, it depends on the type of a company, also on the type of a person.
Yeah.
Or team involved. So I'm not somebody who say, oh my gosh, you never ever should have taken any external capital.
If I look at, we kind of, I know we're hitting time, but we can do like a speed round on these. Yeah. So you've got Invenco, Altinity, FerretDB, Coroot. It looks like your founder are like pretty involved in those. Yeah. Then you also do a fair amount of angel investing, and you are an LP in the Tweener Fund, just so full disclosure. Yeah, we appreciate that too. So tell me, like, how are these all in the, it probably naturally comes to you when someone has because you've owned this, like, this quadrant of high performance open source, kind of like at that interesting quadrant, which ends up being a good place to be. Are all of them in that kind of sphere?
Yeah. To a certain extent. I think if you look at this, how do you come about, right, to this? For me, I think it's like I don't know, like I was always having itch, right? And I think I always was kind of like a 0 to 1 guy, right? I think for me, at all time in Percona, people say like, Peter, please, I understand, like you have 10 ideas before breakfast, and all of them are good one, but we cannot do all of them. Some of them are kind of naturally have appeared elsewhere, right? They say, hey, there are some people you met, right, and you talk about the idea, say, wow, that's cool. Why don't start a company around that? And that's what happened, right? I mean, I think before Coroot, right, I was not involved day to day significantly in those companies. Like I helped to start them, right? To connect people, maybe provide some initial capital, right? But I was not involved in day to day.
Yeah. Okay. So Coroot's one that's like more of a. Have any of them had exits? Like, what's the status of? So let's. I like the Ferret one. Let's start there.
No, FerretDB, that's like a pretty early stage company, right?
So it's still early stage.
So I mean, no exits.
Any of them starting to get some scale?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say the largest, the second one besides Percona would be Altinity right? That's also, like get into significant scale. Yeah.
Yeah. What's Altinity do? Just for
Altinity, they provide solution around technology called ClickHouse, and that is a very popular analytical database. Those days, like also open source analytical database.
Yeah. Okay. Is it like an open source? Is Altinity itself an open source, like kind of the Percona model applied to this?
It's not completely exactly the same,
Yeah.
right? And there is a reason, right? Like you may say, like, well, why wouldn't why you would, for example, have Postgres or MongoDB at Percona, right? But not ClickHouse, right? And it was kind of different company started, right? And there's like a very big business reasons.
Yeah.
Now,
I'm not saying it should be in Percona.
Yeah, no, what I'm saying is,
yeah.
but in the end, yes, you can think about now there is like a ClickHouse Inc., which is like Oracle for MySQL, right? And then ClickHouse provides alternative software and a cloud services in a ClickHouse market.
Yeah. Okay. And then what's Coroot do?
Oh, Coroot is observability, right? That is, I think, another like a passion of mine, like because if you are interested in any kind of performance, like habitability, all this kind of stuff, you figure out in many cases it is just people don't understand what the hell is going on inside the systems, and that causes all the problems. And how do you deal with that? Well, you make sure you have some good observability systems, and that's what Coroot is about. It has, I think, is like a very interesting take on the observability ecosystem, right? Where you would see a lot of evolution of the industry has been how we can get kind of more graph and more data and more graphs, right? Maybe, maybe you've seen some of your tech team have, it's kind of, many thousands of dashboards.
Datadog. There's a lot of companies in this.
That's right. Yeah. And we are saying, well, how can we sort of give you the minimum amount of data, right? But so you can still resolve the problems, because in many cases, less is more. It's kind of right,
specifically around database performance.
No, it's more of an application performance. Databases is
the full stack.
Yeah, full stack. Yeah, databases is an important part of that, but it's not limited to databases.
Okay, cool. Have you ever done anything in crypto? Like, is that? It seems like the kind of area you would get curious about.
I mean, in this case, I would say I have like some small investments, but I haven't done like a big.
Sometimes you don't have, being the database guy, sometimes you don't have time to go deep. And then, I've been thinking a lot about AI, and it didn't really click until I started seeing these retrieval augmented generation systems where you kind of marry the LLM and all the natural language stuff it can do, and it's got its own issues with hallucinations. Mm-hmm. But once you kind of run it through a database of things, then it starts to get really interesting. Have you been poking around that at all?
Oh yes, yeah. I mean, absolutely. I think AI is very interesting, right? I like to compare that to something like akin to internet, right? It's like, well, right now, very few businesses can escape internet, right? Especially businesses at scale. Well, you need to use internet, right? Internet is not a whole, right? Very few businesses say, well, we just do internet, right? We use internet, right, for our business, and the same thing about AI, right? So, yes, I mean, I think we are always looking in all products how to use that both for end users and also for internally for optimization, right? Workflow, for example, it's very useful for things like a support or managed services, right? How you can increase productivity.
Seems like you'd have an affinity for the open source. Have you played with Llama, and do you have like a Llama instance running at home? I always imagine you having like a bunch of servers running crazy stuff.
I mean, I do have some servers, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have specifically Llama
or one of the open source ones. Yeah.
Oh yeah, but
Okay, cool. Well, let's wrap it up. So you've been at this a long time, and you started all these companies, and you built one, bootstrapped a $50 million company. What are so for listeners and viewers that are founders, what are some lessons that you would tell when you meet with a founder and they ask you for lessons?
Yeah. What there are a few, right? So the first one I want to say it's maybe described as UBU. For me, then I came to this space in MySQL. We had well, that was like a first and kind of American, if you like, a CEO, right? And he is this like a, tall, very good looking, movie star like spoken guy, right? And I was like, wow, can I be like him? Probably not ever, right? Like in this case. But then you figure out, well, you know what? Like as a CEO, there is like so many different paths, right? And for me, it maybe took a while to overcome that kind of feel like, oh, the CEOs look like this and I'm not like that. Yeah. Well, you know what? CEOs can come in all the shapes and sizes. You be you, right? Now, as a CEO, as a founder, you have a unique opportunity, right? Like you can build the people of the teams around you. Right.
Yeah.
You can make them to do whatever you want to do. Right. You
can't pick your boss, can't pick your family, but you can build your own company however you want.
That's right. And I think that is fantastic. Right. And I think the question in this case, as an entrepreneur, right, you need to be kind of selfish. Right. You're starting the company. You need to see like, well, selfish in a good sense. Right. What will help you to achieve the best best results. Right. So I think that's important. Right. For example, I know some CEOs are fantastic at selling.
Yep.
I'm not the guy, right? I am very quickly got somebody to do that for me. Yep. I would still be, like maybe do dog and pony show in front of the customers, but talking about those like negotiating contracts. Oh my gosh, kill me now. Right? Like some people are different.
You don't like to spend hours in the indemnity clause?
Yeah. So that's a good point, right?
It's very painful.
So that's probably one thing. And I think the second thing, what I would say is also very interesting, right, is how much the CEO job changes. Because when you start, and if you really start with like a bootstrapping, you start as one, or maybe kind of two, right? You had like two partners started this, pretty early on. But you're actually doing a lot of stuff yourself, right? You're kind of hands-on, right? Everything is you, right? And then you hire people, you tell them what to do, right? And then you hire other people which to tell other people what to do, right? And then you kind of maybe more evolve in somebody who kind of, deals with critical issues and kind of maintains the culture of a company, right? And that's, things change. And the CEO of, right, today is going to be different from a CEO of tomorrow, right? For me, the nature of my that change was, and kind of like how much of a change it was surprised at times. And also for me,
when you have a 350-person company, you're largely doing HR, unless you've hired someone to take care of that, which you can do too.
Well, which, of course I did. But I think that you bring to another interesting point, right? Then I remember when I was living in MySQL, it was interesting. That was about like a 400 people company, so like a very simple site. I was thinking like, well, you know what? I don't enjoy working for a large company, but you know what? I don't mind running that. And then I came to a point when I ran the large company, right? I figured out, well, you know what? I don't like running the large company either. Right.
Be careful what you wish for.
I think it's kind of interesting, right? Because it's kind of, like you may think, oh my gosh, I am a boss, I just tell people what to do, right? But there is a lot of those kind of like a mutual relationship, what they expect from you, right? What you need to give a company for that to be successful, right? And so about like 2 years ago, I say, well, you know what? Okay, let me recognize who I am, where, my skills are best applied, and I hired the CEO to run the company, right? So I can be still involved in the founder role, right, and kind of help in
like exec chairman is like a common one.
Chairman, like whatever you would call it. But hey, I am, just to recognize, I am 0 to 1 guy, right? I am not somebody who enjoys steering that 350 people ship and will not enjoy steering even larger ship myself. Well. And I think that's important to recognize, right? I mean, because I also have seen some people who are very, some people are good, right? They go and become a CEO of, 10,000, 100,000 people company, right? Even if they bootstrap that, well, good for them. Some people just have a lot of struggle because they think there's no way out. Kind of, when you get to a point where your business controls you, right? That's, well, why did you start it? Didn't you start that to have that freedom?
Yeah. Yeah, you can always hire someone, and you did.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've referenced 0 to 1 a lot of times. Are you a big fan of Peter Thiel? And to me, that lands as a reference to his book 0 to 1. And he was kind of like, I think he coined the phrase. I don't know if he coined it.
Yes. I like that book and phrase as a reference, right? Yeah. And again, like it's not like really 0 to 1, right? But I think it's maybe I would say 0 to 10, right? Because what for me, I think there is this kind of like a magic number, right? When you kind of all work together, and everybody is kind of on the same page effortlessly, right? That is what I like, right? Because when you can actually spend the time of kind of moving things forward. Because, right, when you are CEO of a larger company, it's like, oh my gosh, you have to like a 350, you have to be on the same page. You have to spend so much time to kind of really explain them over and over again, kind of same shit. And that is exhausting.
Then you run a survey and they're like, the thing they're most dissatisfied about is they don't understand the vision of the company. And you're talking about it literally 12 times a day.
Oh, that's right. Yes. Okay, let's look.
I never
we had it on a
that.
call. Yeah. It was sent to you by email. Your managers talked to you about that. How can you still don't freaking understand it?
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't happen in the teams, teams of 10.
People are pretty clear. Yeah. Cool. Any other books or anything you want to leave people with or lessons before we wrap up?
I think that's good in terms of.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks for doing this. It was great to hear your story linearly. We're happy to have you here in North Carolina. Congratulations on Percona.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
For more Tweener content, check out the Triangle Tweener Times Substack at tweener.substack.com. For more Tweener content, check out tweenertimes.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again soon on Triangle Tweener Talks.